Hey everyone, Alex is here. REST, GraphQL, tRPC. What should we finally check? Let's discover. REST, the one that is so understandable and that everyone has been using. So REST API. Yes, we're discovering about APIs and all the things. And what should we finally take? Let's discover what we have with our REST API. I think REST API is most understandable for you, and there is nothing hard here. For example, we're checking Festify server, working our Node.js today, and we can discover some list details, great, and listen to our server. So we're just listening to our server. We're just having a simple database. We're taking the data, so the specific data we can write to the ID to discover the specific post ID, and we're just taking that post, find specific ID, and if it's not finding, we're just replying code that it's not finding, and then we're replying with what we have. And for creating posts, we're just taking the body that we have and sending the body if something wasn't taken. So we're just sending that title and body is required, and then we're adding that to our object, adding to database, and then just replying to 101, the code that means that something was created, and that's all. And that's quite easy to work on with. We also can work with caching here easily, so reply header cache. And let's check one thing. Right now, currently, we'll go fast on all the three things. And then we'll be going back and forth to understand what is crucial at which variant. And the caching will be one of the interesting things that we'll be discovering as a separate point. So I want to learn more about caching. Let's go to that a little bit later. GraphQL. It's something more interesting, and not so many people know how to work with it, but I think that a lot of backend developers have been discovering that, and it's quite understandable for them how to work on this. What is GraphQL? GraphQL is Meta's innovation to work on hard objects, and it's a quite easy way of working here because firstly, you have only one endpoint, only one method, and you're just adding the body of the request. It's quite interesting to discover, so let's discover how does it work on here. So we have our database, we have our types. We'll be talking about types a little bit later. Is what we have posting, we have query, and mutation. Query is when we're taking data, type when we are adding data. Also, I can make enter here, so it will be more understandable for you to see the difference. Then we have resolvers. So resolvers, we have only two of them. It's query and mutation. For query, we can take our post, so it's quite easy here. We're just making post and taking all of our posts that we have. For a post, like specific one, we're just taking ID here. It means that we'll be taking a specific ID that will be put on the post method when it will be sending, and then we're just finding the same way we have been doing that in the rest, the specific post. And for adding that, it will be the same. We're just creating post, we're taking the same object, then we're just putting it to our database and returning our post, specific one that we have been created. Here is the difference of the starting of such application. So first we're using GraphQL Yoga node to start the server, so it won't be Festify. And for this one, we are just creating the server. For creating the server, it's crucial to create the schema. Schema is two things, types and resolvers. That's all. And then you're starting your application. So this one is based on the types and resolvers, and it works on very complex objects, and we'll be talking about them a little bit later. And let's go to the last one. The last one that even I didn't know, but discovered that it's TypeScript remote procedure call. Yeah, so I even didn't remember this name. I just written it here, so I'll be able to spell it right. So it's one of the most interesting things that probably you didn't know, and yeah, let's discover that. So what's to wait? We also have the database. We are also taking some TypeScript, but here we're working with our Festify. One interesting thing. Second one, we're initialing our TypeScript remote procedure call. We're having, based on that, the route. The route is quite similar, as you could see on the GraphQL. It's just post that we're taking the query, and this is the thing. So for each of the posts, like for each of such key, you're using the method, and we have the method query, input, and then query, input, and then mutation, so something similar to what we have in GraphQL, but a little bit different. So when we're making the query without anything, just a simple query, we're making post. When we're having input to our query, so for our query, we're putting input. It's like the method that we'll be putting like with, for example, when you're writing question mark ID equals to something. It's for example, we're having input, and then we're creating the object that will be ID, and here is we're writing that ID should be numeric one. That's the most crucial things in this history. And here's we have the same, but for title and body, and then we have mutation. So for mutation, we'll be putting all of our input for one object. So our input, what we have here, we put that to this object. And then what we're doing, we're exporting our app with the type of the app root. We're working with our server, we're registering cores, so cross-regional, basically to be able to work on this request with the different domains. Okay, I will say in this way. Then we're running, for example, we're running the server as we have been doing that on the REST, but here before that we're registering Festify a TypeScript reproduce remote procedure call plugin through. For that, we have prefix and some options. We're taking our app root, and we're not putting any context here. The separate thing I want you to show is how we can use it, because not a lot of the users have been using it, I am sure on that. We're in our client, we're importing, yes, we're importing our protocol. We're creating protocol on the client. We're having links. We're taking this protocol that is having prefix having working here. And then what we're doing, we have our client right now. We're writing some query and the query that we've been sending. That's the number. Then we're awaiting for client, send await event, mutate, and what we wanted to mutate. If I'm not mistaken, one sec, I made a mistake here probably. If I'm not mistaken, we should be able to put, for example, post here, or just write post. Yeah. In any case, that's not important right now how we work with client today, and that's important with logic that we'll be using. And let's talk about specific logic that we're using for all of these three methods and when should we use each of them. So let's start the difference here. The difference here is quite big in the implementation, and you should understand that the logic of discovering we wish to take based on the next logic. Use REST basically. So consider REST as basic of your API. Then think in the next way. When not to choose REST and what REST could have problems on with. GraphQL. Why we have GraphQL? It's based on the Facebook. Facebook has a lot of the data. And when, for example, you're making the query, for example, you're going in the post, for example, of the post that you have from the day, you see a person's image, I don't know, status, if it's online or not, maybe some additional information. When you are hovering on the person's image, you can see some more data. So you should take specific amount of the data from all of their database. When you're going to their profile, you can have more data. When you're going to the group settings, for example, where this person is administrator, you can have another data that you should show to them. So the problem is that we have a lot of the data, like we have one database for that user, and creating each endpoint for working with specific parameters, specific values that should be taken for that specific request, quite hard. So they could have 1 billion, I think, endpoints for querying. Sometimes that value, sometimes that value. For another reason, they wanted to query another two, for example, image and name. For in another endpoint, they only should have the phone number. For example, when you wanted to connect with someone, you should have only their, for example, permissions, if you can make the request to them, or only they can make requests to you, for example, and etc., etc., etc. For example, a lot of different data that should be taken, and the problem is here that important that Facebook is so global, so big one, so each value additional that they send in, first, it's incredible amount of data that could be leaked, so they should control each value that they're posting to us, because if they, for example, will put additional parameter that won't be using, it costs them a lot of the money. So they should optimize it as much as they can. So when they're taking the data, they're taking the specific data that they should have take. And they're not, it's good to be controlled based on the client side which data they should have. For example, you have all the database, you're making something like SQL request to take the specific data. And the problem is that why we cannot make, for example, the REST API when we're making the query to SQL, because when you're making the query to SQL, it's quite bad, it's quite leakable. So that's why they have created GraphQL. And GraphQL is like the nodes that you are taking through all of your application. So that's the crucial thing here. Try to understand that when you're working with a complex system, for example, a user's profile that have a lot of the parameters, and for specific times you should have specific values in different places on your application, it's better to use GraphQL. And GraphQL, it's not the one-time option. Like it can be, but base that when you cannot do that with REST, or it will be really complex with REST. So GraphQL will help you on that. Moreover, you can have types on that. So GraphQL just work with some additional servers places. So you can go just to the link to discover to Apollo server, for example, to put you the link for GraphQL server and see all of the mutations, queries that you can use, or their types, and etc. Because REST, they don't have that. They can have that only with some documentals, for example, Swagger. They can show you the types, but here's types are more easy to understand. That's the thing here. So you should use GraphQL when you have complex database that will be querying a lot, that the client side could query specific things and not to leak a lot of the data that you should not use. So that's the thing here. And let's go to the TypeScript remote pursuit call. So use that when you have Fullstack application on TypeScript. That's all. Really, why? Because firstly, you have full typization. So when you'll be using it here, And when in query you'll be using, for example, ID, what it will be instantly in code editor say which ID should be taken. It can, when you'll be running, it can immediately say that some things have been changed and the ID that you'll be putting into that place will not work. So when you have full stack application, use that, and that will be the easiest for you. When you know TypeScript, you should not discover other applications, other ways of working on, and it's quite really TypeScript based, so it will be the easiest way to understand for you. And the most interesting thing that it's a great compiling with your client side. So that's all. I think that when you're creating full stack application based on the TypeScript, I think that's the only one reason, really. You can have other reason, for example, if we'll be talking about work with mobile apps, so GraphQL and REST API, they're quite good working with both of them. This one, tRPC, can also work with mobile app, but it will be harder because it's web first application. So when you're creating only web application, yeah, that will be. But if you think that you will be scaling to the something to mobiles, it probably won't work. It really won't work because it's, once more time, it's web-based server. It can be externalized to work with mobile, but if you know that you'll be working with mobile, so you should not use that because it will be harder for you. So these two, they will be working good here. Saying about us and working with a lot of the teams and combine one query to, yeah, so when you're working with multiple teams, GraphQL will work here better because they can have, as I remember, even extension, Apollo fragments, something like that, that can combine the requests and services, microservices from different teams. So it will be easier working here. These two, you can create it also in REST, in tRPC, but it won't be working the same way. It will be harder to create that. They don't natively support that. But of course, you can write code to support it, but GraphQL natively supports that. Caching is important here. Caching in REST API will work amazing because you can even put here in the headers caching. In GraphQL, because of the hardness of the system and it's always sending you in the post way. So here, for example, you're sending get methods. So get methods there easily supports cache control, post not, and GraphQL based only on post requests. So here it will be really tricky. Yes, you can create everything, but here it will be tricky. So when you know that most of your data will be changing every time, for example, at Facebook, most of the data they're changing every time. So maybe it's even better to use GraphQL. But when you know that a lot of the information that will be querying, most of the time they will be unchanged, think twice to use GraphQL, for example. Or you can discover some plugins to cache things when you should have that, but just know that it will be a question here. The next things, I think that the team should understand REST API much easier, and it's working on a wider audience of developers. GraphQL you should really have people who understand GraphQL, because GraphQL have a lot of interesting things that will be known only by people who really worked on that. So yes, you can teach them, they could learn that, of course, but that's a question. That's a question here. It's not as easy as REST. Yes. And TypeScript remote pursuit call, as you can understand, only for TypeScript developers. So if your developers don't want to use TypeScript, they wanted to work on Java, for example, it won't work. So that's why it mostly compared to work on with front-end developers who are creating full-stack application. So that's ideal for them. They should know on the TypeScript, and this combination is quite amazing, nothing even to say. But yeah, so that's the problem that we could have here. And that's mostly all that you should know about the difference about them. I hope that I was able to, in the easy way, to say what's the difference here. But if you will have any more questions, just write down in the comments below. So once more time, REST.js is most that we have been all using, getters, posts, etc. GraphQL and TypeScript remote pursuit call, they're quite something similar, but that is TypeScript based for full stack developers who are using only for web application, not only, but it's more recommended. So when you have web application, you don't think that you will externalize that, and if you will externalize that, you okay to use another service, for example, REST API. So if you're okay with that, go with this thing. If your developers understand TypeScript, understand how the server works, I think that will be a ideal variant. If you have a real complex system, for example, you have working with, for example, what could be hard, like objectively hard? I think the payment system, for example, the registry of a lot of the payments, where you can change the payment for some specific user, discover their status, discover the different banks request, and you're making that as a registry with a lot of such payments. So in this way, I think such complex system, so when you're thinking about a complex system with a lot of the fields, a lot of the mutations, and that especially in the different parts of the application, the client can check one specific data, or he can add, for example, a specific payment, and he should retake all the data. So you are just creating GraphQL that have mutations, queries, and client will take by himself, for example, in post, which fields he specifically wants to, because that's why we're writing type here. So this type post will be working here, here, and here. So when we're writing post, for example, we want to take all of the posts, but only their IDs, or only their titles. So that will help us to take. So we'll write, for example, query, as I remember. You take query, then, for example, if I'm not mistaken, posts, and in post you'll take ID, and it will return you all the posts in this way, all the post with ID, for example, or if I'm not mistaken, it can in general return just list of IDs, for example. Or it will return an object with an ID, and you won't take a lot of values that you're not using, because it's a problem sometimes. So when backend developers send you a list of all of the data that they have, and you just take whatever you want, but sometimes that object of the data could be so long, so you should not use all of the data. So that's also crucial here. Thanks everyone for watching this video. I hope that you discovered when to use what, and if you have any more questions, please write down in the comments below. I think we'll be able even to create a full stack application, for example, based on this service, because we have been creating something similar to on GraphQL, on REST API. And once more time, only your wishes, so write down in the comments below what you want to, and we'll see you in the next videos. Bye.